Hello and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So we are on to the edit section of things here. We want to be able to edit. Now we can go to the edit section and everything will seem to work fine until we click save. Things will work fine here. If, for example, I type what I should not be typing. Oh, wait a minute. What am I not supposed to be typing here? Let's say if we empty the amount and quantity and try to save, we do get data validation, product quantity is required, product amount is required, etc, etc. Okay, and if we try and browse and maybe add a non-image file, let's see if it's going to recognize that, and it says image must be a valid JPEG or PNG file. So it actually does recognize all this. The only problem is it just doesn't save. So in order for us to be able to save, let's create an update function. So I'm just going to go into the core and go to model.php, because model.php is what contains all the functionality that we want every single model to have. So the same way we have the insert function, it would be nice to have something similar that does an update. So I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Ctrl+Shift+D if you're using Sublime Text, that is. So instead of insert here, we're going to have update. So I'll select this and say update, like so. Okay. So in order for us to update, we need the data that we're updating, of course, but we also need an ID. So let's put ID there. Come on. So we need an ID so that we know which row to update this information here. So two things there. Now let's look at things that we need here. So there's clean array, so get allowed columns. That's okay, we need that. And then we get the keys of the data here, and then we do an update. Now an update query looks like this. So the same way we have select or from or insert. The insert works in a particular manner. The way this was here, it was insert into table and then etc, etc, and then values here. But update works a little bit different. It works like this. It's update and then the table name, update table, and then you say set, and then you give the columns one by one. So maybe there's an ID column, you say ID is equal to 1, 2, you put a comma and you say description is equal to, and then you put some content there, and then you keep going, comma, you give the column name and its value. And then, of course, you have to tell it where to update. In this case, we would say where ID is equal to a very specific ID value. And then we might as well say limit 1 if we know that it's only one column we need to edit. But you never know. Sometimes you may want to edit more than one, so we can just ignore that. But limit 1 when we are using IDs, because usually IDs are unique. And so usually maybe limit 1 would make sense, because what limit 1 does is when the database is reading and finding a row, once it gets to that row and updates it, if there is limit 1, it will know to forget about it now, the job is done. But then if the limit 1 isn't there, it will keep going down the line to try and find more IDs that match your search criteria and try to update those as well. So if your database has a lot of rows, that could waste valuable time, but this time is milliseconds, so not really a big deal. But this is what we are looking to create, something like this. So I'll leave that right there for reference while we do this. So update, there's no into, there's just the table name, so this remains as it is. And then we have to put set over here like so because of that. So update table set, and then we now start telling it what to do. Now in this case, because we are using prepared statements, we are simply going to say ID is equal to, and then we'll put a full colon and say ID like this. Description is equal to, and then exactly the same thing here, description. So just like last time, you can see this is very similar. It's the key and key, key and key, only the second part has a full colon. So this kind of works to an extent, but not really like this. So we need to look through in order to create what we have seen here. So I'm just going to say for each, that way we can look through the keys themselves. So keys, as we don't really care the key of the key, right? Because these will just be numbers like 0, 1, 2 and so on. What we really care about are the column names. So I'm just going to call this one column. So for each keys as column. So every time through the loop, we have one of these in here. So what I will do is add to the query. So I'm just going to say query dot equals. So don't forget that dot there. That means add to. Otherwise you'll be replacing if you just put the equal sign. So query dot equals, and then here, this is where we want to add this situation, key and then equal to. So I'm going to put an equal to, maybe no spaces required, and then a full colon. Here I will put key column actually, and then add to it, and then do the same thing here again like that. And that's it really. The only thing is I need a comma for the second item coming in. So I'm just going to concatenate a comma to the end like so. Okay, pretty good. So once I add this, then I've created this section right here. So you see comma and then one more added just like that up to the very end. Then we need the where clause, but we don't need a comma at the very end. So what I need to do right here is make sure that on the query I say equals to. I'm not saying dot equal at this one, it's just equal to, and I'm telling it to trim any commas from the beginning or the end of the string. So this one is the query. What do I want to trim? I can specify a very specific character, which is comma in this case. So query is equal to trim the actual query, remove all commas. So once we do that, okay, we're just removing the commas that are the comma that's at the end or at the beginning. That's what trim does. And then once we reach at this point, now we want to add our where clause, right? So the where clause should deal with the primary key. So where ID is equal to ID. So we need to, for now we're going to use an ID as the primary key, but it's a good idea to learn how to get the actual primary key from your table and then use that. That way your function is more dynamic. It doesn't matter if you change your primary key from ID to another one, it will still find it. But for now, let's just use this ID directly. So what I'll do is here, I'm just going to say query dot equals. This time I'm adding to this. So after trimming that, I want to add a where clause. I'll just leave a space there so that it's not right next to it, and say where ID is equal to, and then we'll say ID like this. Okay, that does the query. So once we are here, new database, and then boom, and then the clean array. Now keep in mind that the ID is not part of the data. Now it's entirely up to you how you want to do this. You can remove this ID here and then just make sure that you add the ID to the data. Okay, this could solve a few problems, because then you may not need the update function at all. You can use the same insert function, but then you can tell it to look for an ID column in the data. If an ID column exists, then you know it's an update and then you can update. But for simplicity's sake, we are creating two functions here because this is a tutorial and I'm not trying to pretend that you guys are professionals. Such functions are difficult when debugging, so it's better to separate these things like so. However, once you get to be a professional, there's no need to add an update function. You can use the same insert and tell it to check if an ID exists, then it knows to update instead of inserting. Okay, so here, update ID data. Things going well so far, and then boom, done. But we have an ID in the query, so we need to account for that in the clean array. So what we need to do is add this ID before we supply the clean array here. So clean array is that, but let's copy and add one more item to clean array, which is ID, and then we're going to set that to the ID that we were supplied with. Okay, and this does it. So this is our update function, but we don't need the string because it was just for reference purposes. Very cool. Now we can go to our controller and see if we can actually update something. So in the edit, product edit here, instead of insert, we will do an update. So I'm going to do update like so, but of course we need an ID here. So where will we get the ID? Well, we know the row we are editing, so let's just use this row ID right there. So I'll put that on the update, put it comma, and we are good to go. And then that's that. So if image, actually if not empty is not the right thing to do here, we're supposed to put name there as part of this. So let me do the same for product new. If not empty files, wait a second. Actually, no, this is already enough here. Where I changed it is here. So this should be copied to the product new section right here and paste. Okay. Alrighty then, this looks great. Looks like things are going to work. Now, keep in mind that when we change our image, there's always the old image that was there, and we don't want, let's say a user changes the image 10 times in a day, then we'll have a lot of orphaned images that are not really doing anything but are still there. So right after we delete that, or we update that, remember that this raw variable still contains the old data. So what we can do is delete the old image. So delete old image, and before we redirect, so we can just check if the file exists. So we say if file exists, like so. And what's the file name? Well, it's the row. It's inside row, and instead of ID, it's in image, like that. Okay, so if that file exists, then unlink the file. Okay, so that's how you delete a file, you unlink it. And that's it. So the old file is deleted. Now, this could be a problem if we didn't replace the file, right? So if a file is not replaced and then we simply delete an existing file, then we have a problem. Then it means now we have deleted a file that has not been replaced. So meaning the delete of the file should happen only if there is a file that we have moved. So let's add this right there, like this, inside this if statement, to make sure that we only delete an old file if we've added a new one. Okay, so hopefully this is enough, and let's go back and try something. So I want to just edit the name here and make sure that the file hasn't changed the image. So just put 1 at the end there, simple edit, save, and there we go. So we have a 1 at the end, it has worked. My image still exists, which is awesome. Now if I browse to add a different image, however, let's go to images and let me add maybe image of this hair. There we go. So we have a new image here. If I click edit, you can see that there. But let's just confirm that the other image was deleted by going to the public uploads, and you can see there are only two images, this one and that one. So the old image was indeed deleted. All right, very good. So far so good. Yeah, we are done editing. Let's deal with the delete in the next video.